Does it say it's recording on your computer, Sam? Do you see that? Okay, perfect.
Yes, it does.
All right, I'm just going to make Stephanie co-host and then we'll start. Okay. All right, so we see some good values in our chat box. That's always a good way to start.
Yes.
And another good way to start is to just honor the people whose land that we are on right now, who are the Ohlone and the Chochenyo. And they were the folks, the native folks here before anyone else. And this is the land that was taken from them. So I want to honor those folks at Ohlone, Chochenyo, and those traditions and their values and practices as we move forward. And we're going to introduce ourselves as presenters today, and I'll start. My name is David Usum, and I coordinate the Restorative Justice program at OUSD, and I've been here for going on 10 years. And before that, my background is in conflict resolution and group facilitation, so that's kind of where I come from. And in terms of my value, a value that I want to hold is flexibility, adaptability. That's really important for me, especially in these times. And maybe I'll add improvisation to that, because we have to be comfortable with improvisation. And I'm a musician, so got to keep it improv. I'll pass it to Sandy.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sandy Simmons, and I work very closely with David and have for going on 10 years as a clinical and school social worker in community schools, student services, behavioral health unit. A lot of words to say. I'm a child and family therapist that's worked in schools for a very, very long time. I was licensed in 1983, so you can do a little math there. The value I'm holding is love. I think many of us are here because we love kids. And so here we find ourselves making that our life's work. And I think that's all I want to say. I'm going to pass it to Sam.
Hey, y'all. I won't be doing too much presenting, but I am here helping support the team. My name is Sam Offenberg. This is now year 6 with Oakland Unified for me. I spent 3 years as a special education teacher, and this is now year 3 as an instructional coach, predominantly working with secondary schools, mostly middle, but I also have a 6 through 12 school. And I'm trying to keep joy going. I think right now, with everything going on, it is becoming increasingly difficult to keep that in mind. So yeah, happy to be here. And Stephanie.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Gemolo, and this is my 2nd year in Oakland Unified and my 2nd year as a special ed instructional coach. I'm originally from Chicago, which is where I started teaching. And yeah, Sandy is my Chicago sister. And word of the Restorative Justice program in Oakland traveled all the way to Chicago. And that is really what brought me to Oakland, was the prospect of working with this department. And so I am thrilled to be collaborating with them today for this professional development. And the value that I'm holding is students and family first. In my role currently, I don't always get to work directly with students and families, which has been a challenge for me. But it's really important for me to remember that everything that I'm doing is in the interests to support students and family. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day today. We know that you have a lot going on, and we're excited to have you all here.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. So we're just going to take a few moments here just to kind of become present in the space and to get into our bodies somatically and help us regulate each other. And we'll do that if you're willing to do this and you're able to do this. You know, I know some of you may have kids running around or animals jumping all over the place, but just do your best to just take a few breaths at your own pace. I'm not going to count you down or anything. And if it's helpful to follow this gift, then you can do that. But if you don't want to, you can just close your eyes and take about 3 or 4 deep breaths and let it out slowly. Okay, thank you for that. Hopefully we are now arrived in this space and we can move on. Here's a quote that I really like. I think it's appropriate for the work that we do, and I will read it to you. Feel free to follow along. First, I need to get everybody's picture out of the way. And it's not moving. Okay, great. There it is. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood, and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. And I feel like that is our work. That's Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I think that's how you pronounce it. And the author of The Little Prince. Some of you may know that. And that'll be our opening. Okay, Stephanie.
So the purpose of this workshop today is to orient our counseling enriched and our intensive counseling enriched teachers and social workers and any support staff that might be joining us here today towards a trauma and healing informed perspective of restorative justice in schools. We're hoping to answer today, what is it, how is it implemented, and why it is imperative. And then to do that, we're going to go through our agenda. We're going to start with, we did our opening and our check-in. And then we have a primer on restorative justice philosophy and the rollout of it. Then we'll move into a discussion of trauma and restorative justice and how it relates to SPED students and families. And then how moving restorative justice circles online and how that will look. And we'll provide some tools, games, and resources along with some question prompts. And then we'll all close out together. Just a reminder that if you have any questions or comments, please use the chat feature. And our wonderful Sandy Simmons is our chat monitor queen of the day.
Okay, so we're just going to I'm just going to kind of go high level here, and right from the start, I'm going to start talking about restorative justice or restorative practices, as some people refer to it, and the connection with trauma. Even before I get into what restorative justice is and where it's from and how we roll it out. And this way you can begin to see how it's interconnected with trauma-informed practices and how it can connect in your work in SPED. And so I will say that if you have a lot of experience in trauma and you understand trauma and how it works with children, then maybe try and have a beginner's mindset with this, and maybe there's something you can learn that's new or have an aha moment. So trauma can create a cycle that is of harm and aggression, right? So trauma, harm, aggression, harm, right? And this cycle can put some folks, whether they're young people or adults, into a fight, flight, or freeze mode. Okay, that's what can be triggered from trauma. And trauma doesn't have to be a physical trauma on your body. It can be an earthquake, could be trauma, or witnessing violence can be trauma, or even vicarious trauma, just hearing about something that was traumatic. There's also trauma that can be acute, meaning it happens sort of in one instance, or complex over time. And many of our young people in Oakland experience complex trauma over time, over and over again. And what it can do is put someone into this fight, flight, or freeze mode, right? And there's one thing in the classroom that's not going to happen when you're in fight, flight, or freeze mode, and that's learning. And so that means it's incumbent upon us as the adults in this space to help create a space where students can move from that space of fight, flight, or freeze into a learning space, okay? And so one of the ways that we do that in restorative justice is we create the environment that's conducive to learning, meaning an environment that's a healing space where people can begin to break out of that cycle of harm and aggression, okay? And the way we do that in restorative justice is we do circles in the classroom. It's that simple. And we build intentional relationships, caring relationships with the young people in our space and with our other colleagues and adults. And that creates an environment where people can access their social and emotional skills. And the prefrontal cortex, this part of their brain where people organize and plan and do the things you need to do to be in, to maintain relationships, but also to learn and to do the work necessary to engage in learning. So when we do circles in the classroom to build community, even if we're just talking about something fun or playing a game, or talking about some current event, it's not just something to do that's fun. It's actually creating a space where students can engage in social emotional skills, engage in social emotional learning that allows them to access this part of their brain, the executive functioning, which then in turn allows them to engage with the curriculum, right? And so it's necessary to create the environment where learning and teaching can happen, okay? So that's one of the ways in which doing circles in the classroom is trauma-informed. The other way in which we're going to get into in a little bit, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, is it creates a predictability in the classroom too. If they know there's going to be a circle every Friday morning or every Wednesday or every day, and they know how the circle flows, that's predictability, which is a trauma-informed practice, okay? And creating a predictable environment in the classroom is really important. Okay. I also don't want to spend a lot of time on this because we have so much to go over, but these are our foundational principles in OUSD for restorative justice. And we came up with these here in the district based on our understanding of restorative justice. And so in other words, everything we do in OUSD related to restorative justice needs to emanate from these principles and be a springboard from these principles, okay? So just take a look at them. I'm not gonna read through them all, but they're all about being inclusive, being in community with each other, and about justice as being healing rather than punishment, okay? And the way justice happens via healing is through accountability, true accountability, okay? So some people, I've heard some people say that, well, restorative justice is soft because all someone has to do is say they're sorry. That's a misunderstanding of what restorative justice is. Restorative justice is extremely difficult when you're talking about a harm and people that have harmed other people, because it's about being accountable to that harm in a way that's meaningful, relevant to what happened, and heals the people that have been harmed, including the person who did the harm, because harmed people harm people. And so we need to get to that original harm too, in order to stop that cycle, okay? So, and lastly, that last one there, this can work, I can live with it, that's about consensus decision-making. It's not a majority rule process in a circle, it's consensual decision-making. So everyone has to be able to at least live with the decisions that are made in circle. Okay, y'all have access to these slides, and so I encourage you to go through and spend a little bit more time with this. Maybe think through and look at each one of these and think, you know, which one's resonating with me right now as you look at this, you know. The other thing, and I mentioned this earlier when I mentioned the Ohlone Chochenyo folks in this area, that's really important to understand is that restorative justice is not of the dominant paradigm. And I understand that here I am, a white man saying this, but it's really important that you understand that restorative justice comes from an Indigenous worldview, not any one particular Indigenous worldview, but an Indigenous worldview that many Indigenous folks around the world tend to have, which means that it's community-based, it's inclusive, it's relational, and it's about accountability. Okay, because when you look around at other indigenous justice systems around the world, that tends to be what you see. Not always, but tends to be. And so I listed a few here just to kind of give you an idea what I'm talking about and what we want to get across to you. The Maori people in New Zealand, they convinced their government in the early 1980s to do some listening sessions around their tribal Maori process for dealing with harm. And they convinced the government to come up with something they called family group conferencing, which is a very dominant term for their process that they do in their culture, which really brings together the people who've done the harm with the person who's done the harm. And they did this with juvenile offenders for decades, and they've tens of thousands of juvenile offenders in their families, and the people who they've harmed have gone through this process. And as a result, they've been able to close most of their youth incarceration facilities, and victim satisfaction has just gone through the roof, and recidivism rates have dropped dramatically. So wildly successful, and sort of spread around the world from there. The Navajo, or as they call themselves, the Dene, word for offender is one who acts as if they have no family. Okay, so again, coming from that indigenous context, an offender is one who acts as if they have no family. The Nixa Nation in British Columbia, First Nations up in Canada, a woman named Faith Tate, she's quoted as saying, "There's no such word for offender in our language. The word we use is unhealed." Okay. Many of you may remember the genocide in Rwanda with the Hutus and the Tutsis, and post-genocide, they have a process they call gacaca, which is also based in restorative values, where people would come together and listen and talk about what happened, and people who had done unthinkable harms to other people and their families were able to express what they had done, and the people who had been harmed were able to ask questions and heal through that process. And then, of course, truth and reconciliation in South Africa. All of these processes are not without challenges. It's very difficult to do this, especially in the dominant context that we're in, not just in our country, but in other countries. But it's really important to acknowledge this indigenous paradigm, because I think that's one of the reasons why in OUSD it's been sustainable. And it's because young people and adults, staff, see that there's some weight to it, to our process and to this process. And yes, allows them to connect to their ancestors, you know, which isn't something you hear about in schools often, but that's important to a lot of people. And so things like that are one of the reasons why it's become popular here in OUSD and has stayed. This is just a picture I like. You may have seen it before. Efe children in Zaire. Just an example of doing things in a circle. If you think about it, so much is done in circle. Birds build nests in circles, whirlpools are in circle, our galaxies in a circle. It's a very powerful shape, and so there's a reason why we also use a circle without a table, just everybody in a circle. This is a game that they play. Okay, I know I'm doing a lot of talking. I will duck out here pretty soon and pass it on, but this is the part about really understanding the difference between retributive justice, or what is our modern justice system, and restorative justice. And retributive justice, which is about retribution and punishment, is really concerned about what was the law that was broken, who did it, and what are we going to do to them. It's pretty simple. It's antagonistic. It's about winners and losers. It's not about healing. In fact, if you've ever been a victim of a crime and had to go through a court process, you've probably felt left out of the whole process and not heard, because it's offender-centric, our process. It's the state of California versus, you know, whoever the offender is. So it's really concerned about punishment and not really about healing. And so restorative justice, on the other hand, is about healing harm. So we're not really concerned about the rule that was broken, the ed code violation, the law. What we're concerned about is the harm that was caused and to whom. And then every harm creates needs. So what are the needs that have arisen as a result of this harm? And what are the obligations to repair, to meet those needs, or to repair that harm, or to reweave the community? You know, the threads of the community that have been fractured, how do we reweave them as best as possible? Sometimes it's not possible to fully make something right. So we use a circle process primarily, and we involve all the stakeholders to figure out what was the harm, what are the resulting needs, and what is the obligation to meet those needs. And that's really the difference between restorative justice and retributive justice. It's about healing via accountability, because as I said before, harmed people harm people. And I mentioned sustainability and why RJ has been so powerful in Oakland Unified School District. Part of it is because of the connection to community. And one way we've connected to community is that RJ in Oakland is a direct legacy of the work done by Black Panthers. A lot of the early pioneers of RJ in Oakland were and are Black Panthers or former Black Panthers. And so restorative justice did not come to the district as like a curriculum, like a lot of things are. Like, that's why in the 10 years I've been at the district, we've never developed a curriculum and you know, handed it to people and said, here, just walk through this, which has been hard in our school district, because kind of that's what people expect is a curriculum. You know, give me the 1, 2, 3 and the protocols. But we don't do that. We're asking people to be a certain way, to be with each other in a certain way. And a lot of this work was started with the Black Panthers, and the legacy continues on into our school district via restorative justice. So the work is connected to community. RJ is not just done in a vacuum in the school district or in a particular school. It actually has tentacles out into the community and must, by definition, connect to community, because restorative justice is about community, if nothing else. Okay, so moving through, I want to kind of explain to you. So we've talked about the origins of restorative justice. We talked about what it is in terms of the philosophy and how it's different than retributive justice. Now I want to focus in on the school district and in schools, and I want to scaffold it for you. Now, as we go through this 3-tiered model, I don't want you to think in terms of this is the definition of restorative justice. I want you to think about this as an easy way to scaffold it, to make it easy to understand in the educational context. But we do not define restorative justice by 3 tiers, okay? It's just an easy way to understand it. And so tier 1, many of you might know this model or this framework called multi-tiered system of support, acronym MTSS, which is one of the reasons we scaffold it this way, so that everybody can understand it in a way that they also scaffold other things in our district. But tier 1 is about community building, providing those connections and relationships, allowing us to practice our social emotional skills like self-awareness, social awareness, responsible decision-making, those kinds of things, empathy, patience, listening. Everyone in the school community should have access to these kinds of circles. And I'm not just talking about students, I'm talking about staff, parents, community-based organizations working with the school, local businesses within the ecosystem of that school should be able to feel connected to each other and welcome, okay? And so we do circles, talking circles, just to kind of connect with each other on that level. When most people think of restorative justice, this is what they think of, this tier 2, which is about dealing with harm and conflict, responding in a way where we use the foundation that is built in the tier 1 and the relationships built in tier 1 to have difficult conversations about harm or conflict. And we do this in a circle too, okay? And we also train hundreds of students each year how to do these types of circles, as well as the tier 1 circles. It's not just something that we do to students, this is something that we do with students and that they also do with each other. And tier 3 is individualized support. And so that might be a welcome circle for a new student, or if there's a new teacher coming in the middle of the year, we might transition do a welcome circle for them, or transition a teacher that's maybe going out on maternity leave, transition them out and wish her the best. And it just makes sense to sort of do those kinds of circles to, you know, if there's a new student that's been incarcerated and we're welcoming them into school, doesn't it just make sense to connect with them and say, here, this is how things go here, here's what I can offer you realistically. It just means being human with each other, really. It's about being in a human connection with each other. So this is how we roll it out in OUSD in the 3 tiers. And it's an easy way to sort of understand, like, you know, where's my connection here? You know, maybe you're a teacher and you're thinking like, well, you know, really it's my role here is to support tier 1 community building circles, right? I don't have to worry so much about the harm circles or the tier 3 welcome circles. Maybe someone else does that, or maybe I can take part in those. But so that's why we roll it out in this way. Okay, and I know this is a lot of colors and a lot of boxes and arrows and words. I'm going to explain this for you. You will understand this by the time I get done this slide. And just bear with me. I know I've been talking a lot. But this is important because this explains the philosophy of restorative justice pretty well. And it's a chart. It's like a graph. You have the x-axis and the y-axis, right? And the y-axis is the one that's up and down, right? Math teachers, isn't that correct? I think so. Good. I guess I'm not. Yes, good. So the y-axis is up and down, and that's about expectations, systems in your classroom, positive rituals and traditions you might have. For example, if you have a circle every Friday morning, that's an example of a positive ritual and tradition. If you meet your students at the door and kind of, you know, do the handshake thing with them, or handshake, high five, hug, whatever it is, a positive ritual and tradition. Also, how to do things in your classroom. Some folks that do PBIS, this would fit into the expectations in terms of PBIS. And really what you're doing is you're creating a culture in your classroom and in your school that are where the expectations are consistent, they're taught, and they're maintained, okay? And they're predictable, okay? So that's the systems piece. And then the x-axis is being in relationship with, having empathy for, okay? And so that might be considered like how it feels, right? And that might be considered climate. That would be characterized by climate. So if you're talking about culture and climate, you're talking about combining these two things, the rituals and traditions and how it feels, okay? So to go through this pretty quickly, if you're looking at the bottom right here, you'll see permissives. So that would be characterized as high relationship, high empathy, but no systems in place. And so you're making excuses for people, for young people, you're doing things for them, okay? It's extremely helpful in the short run, but not in the long run in terms of their learning. The bottom left is being neglectful. That's where you don't have any relationship with students and you don't have any systems in place. That would be considered neglectful, right? So if you're on the playground, you see 2 kids getting in a fight and you're just like, you know what, I'm not trying to see that right now, right? And you walk away, someone else will deal with that. That would be a good example of that. The top left would be punitive. And that's where you've got nothing but systems. You got rules like crazy, but you have no relationship with people or students, right? And so if someone breaks a rule, you're going to do to them. You are going to be out of my classroom. You are going to be out of our school. You are going to be expelled out of our district. Whatever it is, they have no agency in it. But you can see where I'm going with this. If you are high relationship and you've got consistent rituals that are positive and traditions in your classroom and everyone knows what the expectations are and you have systems for that, that would be considered working with. You are doing with. And that takes time, obviously, because you have to build those relationships, okay? But that's an example. So hopefully you're beginning to understand this graphic now. I got this from the New Zealand Ministry of Education, their Kete manuals, which are awesome. If you want to look them up, they're free online. They call them Positive Behavior for Learning. Let's see, I'm going to move on now. And I just want to, this is a really short video. And this is a teacher in Oakland at Coliseum College Prep Academy. She's getting her students in circle. And I just want you to watch it and just kind of see what you notice. 7th grade class. I will warn you that once they start moving their chairs around, it gets really screechy and loud. So you might want to turn your volume down for that and then turn it back up once she sits back down. So let's just watch this for a sec.
For the purposes of community circle, what does a circle need to look like for community circle? Daniel?
That's a circle.
Does it need to be perfectly round?
No.
Okay, so what is it? What does need to be true?
There's no desk in the middle.
There's no desks in the middle. Okay, Osmara?
Everybody has to be included.
Everyone has to be included in the circle as part of the circle. Can't have people hanging out in the back. Yep, Catherine.
You can see everybody's face.
You can see everybody's face. You need to be able to see everybody's face as you look around the circle. Anything else? Anyone think of anything else that's true for the circle? Vanessa, did you have something to share about what a circle? Yeah, come on.
Only talk when it's your turn to talk.
Okay, yeah, and that's once we start the circle, right? So we're kind of just talking about what it looks like. So it doesn't need to be perfectly round, but there shouldn't be space in between the desks either. We want to be as tight of a circle as we can. Okay? So, on your marks, get set, go.
You're muted, David.
Thank you, Sam. There's probably a lot that you notice in there. It'd be great if you could just take a second or two and just put in the chat, what are the things you noticed that the teacher did and that the students did? And I just want to say that from the time she said go to the time that she rang the bell was exactly 60 seconds. So that's all it took for, I think there's 37 kids, I think were in that class. So maybe just in the chat, what did you notice in that video that the teacher did and the students did? Yep, she created a sense of teamwork. The students set the expectations. Exactly. She asked them clear directions. The students did it collectively, built community. The students were accustomed to the ritual. Absolutely. They knew exactly what to do. They also seemed to really want to do it, didn't they? Because they knew that circle was something they wanted to do. Another thing that you may have noticed if you caught it was that all along the top of the wall by the ceiling were paper plates. And on those paper plates were the student values, the values that the students had come up with, and they came up with those in circle. So thank you for listening to me on this RJ piece. Hopefully you got a good understanding of the origins and the rollout of restorative justice and the philosophy. And I would like to pass it on to Sandy now.
Good afternoon. to start with, if it's safe, if you're comfortable, I would like everyone to put on their cameras, and from 1 to 5, what is your self-perceived expertise with trauma and healing-informed principles and practices? Just share out with me. Obviously, I think I'm an expert. Thank you, Stephen Graham. Thank you very much. Thank you, Brianna Donaldson, Christopher Heath. Thank you, thank you. Tara, Chauvin, Ms. Anna, I appreciate that. So moving forward, we have been working in collaboration with restorative justice principles and practices. We've also been using trauma or healing informed principles and practices. And you can see there are 6. Understanding trauma and stress is really about the neurobiology of stress and what that does to the body and what that does to the brain and therefore behavior. I think it's really important to also highlight today with you. David kind of stole my thunder, but he spoke about safety and predictability. It is really important for us to create that in our tier 1 classrooms and also school-wide. And then the third one I want to highlight here is compassionate and dependable student-teacher relationships. So one of my favorite graphics of all time, David just reviewed with you, range of response, and you can see how creating safety and predictability is the systems. And was this the y-axis, the up and down? Okay, English I'm fabulous at, math, not so much. And then the y-axis is the compassion, the empathy, and again, moreover, the dependability of a relationship. And want to speak to that a little more as we move into using what we know about brain science into our classrooms together. So if you would advance the slide. Very, very quick and dirty neurobiology. The prefrontal cortex right here is our learning and executive functioning brain. Our survival or limbic part of our brain is really closer to the brain stem, and deep within is the amygdala, and that's the part that's triggered by I have a slide here to show you a list of triggers. But for me, for example, having been through the firestorm, I'm triggered by the olfactory smell of fire. So I've been really working hard at self-management in these past few days. The reason I'm pointing this out and turning my head is that we have in some of our classrooms a sign of when our thinking brain is online, we fold our amygdala, also our thumb in, put our 4 fingers, and then we're making kind of a hand motion of a brain online ready to think, learn, relate, and grow. And then if students or adults are feeling a little bit triggered, they might be half masked or they might be fully offline. And so that's some of the terminology that you might hear in a classroom where trauma and healing informed practices are taught explicitly and shared amongst the adults supporting the kids. Okay, I'm also the chat monitor. I'm gonna ask buy-in. Oh, love it. That is a ritual you can use if you'd like. Trauma in the brain, David spoke about this too. I will share that David and I have worked very closely together for these 9 years and certainly kind of finish each other's sentences sometimes. What can happen if there's a perceived or real danger? Again, a real danger, this is a good function of the brain to be able to know that you need to run or you need to fight or you need to hide or freeze. but the perceived danger is what we're talking about. And that's where our students and ourselves can be triggered within a classroom based on something that someone said, or a memory, or an olfactory trigger, where we become aggressive, we become irritable, or flight, we isolate, we avoid, we run away, or we freeze. In some cultures, they call that playing possum, flat affect, hoodie up, and very constricted affect. So just stop and take a moment. Think about, what is your go-to triggered response? I would like to say, as a Black woman, I would like to call it that I fight when I'm triggered, but actually I will run like a rabbit. So this is part of the SPED issue, and just in terms of the students individualizing our relationship, individualizing how they're spoken to, or do they have visual cues to know what is their go-to when they're triggered. And along those lines, move to the next slide. Oh, I didn't say move to the next slide. I'm gonna give you a moment. I'm using another device to read the slides because I'm a visual learner. Any questions on this? You can type them in the chat or raise your hand. We're all good with this? Next slide. Thank you. These are common triggers. Most importantly about this list, it is not a complete list, but it is a list to know of your students and of one another on your teams, in your classrooms. What we really are seeking to do are creating environments where these don't happen. So it's not a real PBIS way of doing this where I show you what not to do, but I want you to just think about these lists of triggers. Want to point out too, unpredictability, feeling disrespected, embarrassment or shame, and then praise or positive attention. Sometimes our students and ourselves, we have been given positive attention only to be hurt or abused as a ploy from given that positive attention. Are we good to go to the next one? Thank you, Ms. Davis. Yeah, it does make a lot of sense when you think about it. It looks odd on the slide, does it not? But yes, that is the case. Thank you for that. Next slide. This is why it's safety first in our classrooms. Physical safety, certainly, protection from harm. And I think those of us carrying adults in our classrooms in the special education department, a lot of protection from harm. A lot of our children, our young people have extra needs around that physical safety. And we do a lot of work with that, and I applaud you for doing so. Social safety, can't say any more than that. That's why Tier 1 RJ circles are such a great thing. David and I create social safety with one another. We have each other's backs. How? We've been in circle many, 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 many times. We know one another's values, and we've developed a collegial relationship that works for us. Emotional safety, hence the list of triggers and the discussion about what behaviors look like when our limbic system takes over our prefrontal cortex. And predictability, it's in there again, isn't it? Preparation for transitions. We all know that the transition is the most dangerous part of any school day for any student, and actually for any adult too. Have you gone to conferences in between the workshops, the transition? You lose like half the people. They've decided to go and, you know, take a walk or get some coffee, and they don't come back. Ask me how I know about that. So, next slide. This is really the beautiful part of being a clinical and school social worker now. It's not touchy-feely, it's science. We are hardwired for connection. There is a vagal nerve that starts at our medulla oblongata and runs through the base of our throats, through our hearts and our lungs and our gut. And it allows us to share our compassion with each other who need to borrow our care. The reason I put this out here really strongly right now is I think many of us intuitively know that. When you're holding a baby and your voice changes and you're rocking the baby, you are sharing through your vagal nerve and the baby's vagal nerve the ability to calm. However, I can't hug Stephanie right now. If she's upset or I'm upset, we have to use our voice. We have to use our face based on attachment theory, and we have to develop relationship. So it is harder right now to establish that compassionate relationship. Yes, you speak well. Intimacy can be a trigger and a coping mechanism at the same time. Just a little sidebar, not too long down this rabbit hole, but as an older woman, I'm much more able to use physical touch to calm students. When I was younger, I didn't use it as much. There is, it's around safety, right? And that trigger. So one has to determine who are you in your space and who are you dealing with? Your ethnicity, your gender along the spectrum and your gender. How is your tone? A trainer once said, do you have resting bee face just because that's how your face is? Sometimes you have to put on the Buddha smile, right? Sometimes it's a little bit of acting in order that you establish compassion and safety with your students, especially if you're having a bad day. And that takes me to the next slide. You guys still with me? Cool. The reason that we work to stay regulated is that when our children experience perceived terror, fear, that as they are escalating, we want to stay calm. So if you see the top slide, the child is in a terror mode. It's perception, but that's how they are. And the adult is calm. You'll note here the adult becomes on alert, but that's where the acting comes in, like you're breathing and keeping it on the down low, but you're breathing to keep your own cerebral cortex in line. You're thinking, this is not about me. I am not challenged. I'm not having a power struggle. A child needs help. If you can stay calm, you can provide that co-regulation with relationship with your student. And the bottom slide, if you're not able to stay just at alert, but you get alarmed, or one gets alarmed, I get alarmed, or even fearful, then the student, our child, one another, are not able to utilize us as co-regulators, and they stay in a terror mode while we also go to at least fear. So there is such value in developing relationship and safety for those moments where you may be called upon to utilize your vagal nerve with your student, with your colleague, to co-regulate. Next slide. So yes, I know this is tiny. It's really just to identify with you that at Columbia University School of Social Work, they took the 6 trauma and healing informed principles I shared, and really reframe them into principles and practices during a global health crisis online. Meaning, what does all of that look like now that we're online? And we're very, very concerned, alerted, stressed about what goes on with COVID-19 and the spread and the symptoms, the disproportionate death of Black people, the disproportionate infection of Latinx people, the awful racist attacks upon Asian people, especially at the beginning, and the impact economically amongst the unhoused, the working poor, the poor, really been impactful. So if you look at this slide, it really starts with respect. And we want to acknowledge and normalize not making that it's okay, just like it is, right? And discuss difficult topics. RJ community circles are a perfect place to do that after you've established your relationship, values, and what have you. That you're trustworthy, that you're transparent, that you create those rituals, that you support and connect. Regular check-ins, one-to-one, seemed over the summer working with our summer internship teachers that was the most effective way of engaging, especially our secondary students to start with. Then they were able to come into class spaces online. Input, sharing power and decisions, building in choices when you can, and by all means, cultural humility, respecting one another's diverse experiences and identities. Each of us are not a single story. We each have multifaceted layers of who we are and generations of ancestors and geographical realities that it's wonderful to hear and share. Making assumptions or thinking that one is better than the other is when we get into trouble. So the last slide here, just want to point out that, I made mine big here, is that we are under stress. We are all under stress. As much as we can in our classrooms to create some predictability around stress and some predictability to metabolize that stress, that we can moderate some of that stress, not create it, and that it can be controlled. I'm a complete control freak. One would want everything to be controlled, so it's best for kids, but to the best you can in your classrooms, how do you control the stress level? It develops resilience for our kids and for ourselves and for their families. If it's unpredictable, severe and prolonged, it really makes us vulnerable. And it makes us vulnerable physically as well as emotionally, and certainly socioculturally with our current system of identification of people of color and just the terrible, terrible things that happen to Black and brown people at this time. We certainly want to build some social emotional skills with our students as well as their academic success and graduating from high school, which is really what we're all seeking to do. So with that being said, that's enough of hearing my voice. If you would use the chat and just share out on the social emotional skills, there is a lot of focus on what we can do to self-manage. I believe it starts in self-awareness, but we do want to self-manage. It's part of the job of teacher, counselor, principal in a school. It's also our kids' responsibility. What do you do to keep yourself safe and grounded and able to be a co-regulator and an educator that's predictable and empathetic and someone our kids can feel safe with? By the way, we will not be saving the chat. This is for us to share here only. Want to take a minute or two to do that? Yes, laughter, nature. Others, meditation, absolutely. Taking breaks. There is much to be said, Ms. Donaldson, about brain breaks. Dance class. Well, I dance in my kitchen, but yes, dancing. Not taking things personally. Leaning on your team. Oh, David and I do that all the time. Establishing a productive daily routine. Yeah. Yoga, stretching, walks, reading, mindfulness. Trips to the dog park with your dog, right? Have you noticed how many people are like on social media with those dogs? I love dogs too. I only have a cat now though. Sleep. Yeah, let's talk about sleep. Sleep cleans your brain. Please try to get some sleep. Hiking, listening to music. Collaging. Oh, Ramari Bearden in the house. TikTok dances. I love the collaging too. Thank you all. You know, educators are often so creative. I really wish, I could see all of the collaging that's done and get a peek at some of those TikTok dances. And you would really want to see me dance in my kitchen too, right? I really thank you for listening and for bringing your best selves to your classrooms. So next slide. Are you going to say it, David? He's muted.
Okay, here I am. Yeah, we're going to take a 5-minute break. And what time is it right now? That means it's 2:01. So at 2:06, come on back and we'll finish up the rest of our presentation. So do what you need to do for the next 5 minutes and we'll see you back in 5.
Yes, go on a walk and get coffee, but please come back to us.
Yeah, don't do what I do at boring conferences. Come back at 2:06.
All right, I see it's 2:06. Maybe we'll give everybody about 30 more seconds to come back to their screens.
Let me get this back, Stephanie.
Yeah, no problem.
Sometimes Zoom just does weird things to your computer here. Okay.
My audio's been working this whole time, so let's hope it keeps up.
There we go. Okay.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick disclaimer. My internet is not the strongest with Zoom, so sometimes my audio cuts out. I have to use my principal as a special ed teacher to be very patient. So I just ask you all that if my audio does cut out, just give me about 10 seconds. It usually comes back to. And if someone could just alert me in the chat that it's gone out, I'll pause what I'm saying. So thank you, David and Sandy, for that wonderful introduction and overview about restorative justice and trauma-informed practices. Now we want to bring our focus to our students that we're seeing in our mental health classrooms. So first, I want us to think about what brings our students to these counseling-enriched environments in the first place. So students come to our mental health classrooms because they need a smaller environment and a higher level of social and emotional support to be able to be present for learning. And we also know that many of our students have experiences that have caused trauma. These experiences can have major implications for students' participation in the class and in academics in general. For some, building relationships may be more challenging and building trust can be harder. They may have experienced people breaking or abusing their trust, which makes it harder for them to make new connections with people. For others, past or current hardships may make it difficult to be present for class at the moment. And in addition, and on top of all of that, our students are also in special education. And we know that many times students in special ed feel labeled and stigmatized or even bullied because of this designation. Before they even got into special ed, they may have also had struggles with academics, which could have them feeling discouraged by school in general. So we want to keep all of these things in mind about what might be going on with our students when we're seeing them in our classrooms. So I'm going to post in the chat Restorative Justice and Special Ed put together a two-pager that was sent out with the Google Invite. And I want you guys to post it in the chat right now. I want to give you guys about 3 minutes to look it over silently to just kind of, as we're starting to think about how restorative justice and special ed. Thank you, Sam. So go ahead and click that link, and we'll take until about, I'll say 2:14 for us to go over that two-pager. Thinking about how restorative justice and special ed combine. And as you're reading through it, I would encourage you to put any thoughts or anything that stuck out to you into the chat.
Thank you, Ms. Ramirez. Oh, I'm echoing. I apologize. Other sharings? Yes. Many ways to do that, Tara.
Absolutely.
Therapy to collaborate on RJ. I use circles for group therapy now. Yes, it works very, very well. Other thoughts?
All right, thank you for taking that time to review that document. We're going to continue talking about it over the next few slides. David, could you move to the next one? Okay, so we know our students face challenges and that they also possess incredible strength and resilience. So we're now going to think more in depth about our students and their strengths and challenges through the use of a Padlet. So if you will go ahead and click on the link, thank you, Sam, in the chat. If you haven't used Padlet before, it is one of my new favorite resources. It's a virtual interactive bulletin board. And when you guys pull it up, you'll see what I'm talking about. But there's a few questions on there. So go ahead, and I'm going to give you 3 more minutes to read through the questions, answer the one that sticks out to you, or answer all of them, and then take a moment to read over other people's responses as we're thinking about the students in our class.
All right, we'll take just about another minute. So again, go ahead and you can click on the plus mark underneath any of the questions so you can answer the questions. I see people are also commenting. We have flexibility and resilience, the loss of a parent or unstable housing. Okay, I'm seeing that that maybe you guys are having trouble adding your responses. So let's go ahead and put our responses into the chat. Flexibility is the name of the game in distance learning. So go ahead and put your answers in the chat to any of these questions.
Maybe Sam, you could copy the questions in the chat so we can refer to them.
Oh, that would be great. Thank you,
Back and
Cindy.
forth.
I can also help with that. All right, there are the questions in the chat. Having to switch schools often and not having a stable community. Absolutely, Ms. Anna. We definitely see that with our students. Very distracting to in-class participation. Absolutely. I see students' negative connotations to school sometimes leads to students negatively interpreting intentions or actions from teachers. Being Black in America. Yes, that is a heavy one. Sandy, reviewing IEPs for descriptions of challenges and strengths, definitely. To mitigate impacts, acknowledging experiences through their eyes. I really like that. All right. Well, thank you everyone for participating with that. If there's a few others, please feel free to add them to the chat. Developing trust and open relationships with families as the experts of their children's behavior. Yes, I completely agree with that one, Sandy. Oftentimes I feel parents are not treated like they are the experts of their children, and as we know, they absolutely are. Okay, David, could you go to the next slide? Thank you. So thank you for your contribution to our virtual discussion and for going with the flow with our technical difficulties. I want to just summarize some of the.
Oh, we've lost you, Stephanie, for a moment. Stephanie can't hear me. Lost your audio.
Okay, I think I'm back. I just really quickly want to touch on that. I'm definitely not trying to put all of our students into one category. We know all of our students in our mental health classrooms, each person is individual with their own individual experiences. So not trying to put them all into one bucket, but just trying to think about what are some of the challenges and obstacles that they might be facing when we see them.
And I believe that Stephanie has frozen. Audio and video.
She should be back in a second.
Okay.
There she is.
Thanks, David. So as we've talked about, but I think it's important to reiterate again, creating consistency, predictability. One way to help students who have experienced trauma is to have consistent routines and for students know what to expect. I think that goes back to what someone stated in the chat, especially for our students that may have moved around schools a bunch and have that inconsistency, knowing that when they come to school, they know what to expect, that's going to make a really big difference for them. So this includes creating classroom rules and guidelines so students can work on their own self-regulation and they know the boundaries from which they have to work within. Next thing is spending time building those personal relationships. You want to spend time getting to know your students and letting you know them care. This means taking the time for community building activities. And even though these may not be directly tied to academics, taking the time to do activities like check-ins or getting to know yous or show and tell, little things like that, that can help students get to know one another and can also help them to be more invested in your classroom community. Along those same lines is family communication. Like Sandy mentioned, our families are our biggest partners in educating their children, and they are the experts. So I always like to emphasize positive communication with families, especially for our students in our mental health classrooms. They are used to family communication being all based on negatives. Like they're only getting calls from the school when it's to report about something bad. So taking that time to call a parent to let them know that their student asked a really good question or that they got a good score on a quiz, doing those positive, proactive communications with families will also make it a little bit easier when you might have to make those more difficult phone calls. And it also shows the student that you're not just there to catch them when they're doing something bad, that you're
there to catch them doing something good.
Also, while she's frozen, try very hard to provide 3 or 4 positive to 1 critical comments, both with adults and with our students.
You're on mute, Stephanie.
in the classroom, finding that time to make a few positive phone calls also helped me feel better. And hearing the family on the other line being so excited to get that good news about their student, that was one of the ways that I recharged when I was a teacher. And then finally, be patient, like you all are being with my technology today. Our students, again, are coming to us and they might have a really hard time building trust. And creating community takes time. So just making sure that we're being patient.
I would imagine she knows that her audio has gone out.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I'm so sorry. But yes, make participation voluntary at first, so that we don't want students to feel forced into participating in these maybe possibly more vulnerable activities. Okay, we can go to the next slide, David. Thank you. All right, so now what we wanted to do is break down a few of our major disability categories and talk about how, just give a quick summary of what those disabilities might look like and a tip for how to modify and accommodate our RJ activities to help students that have these diagnoses. And an extra special shout out to Sam, because this is taken from the 2-pager that he really helped create. So our first one is an intellectual disability. And also a reminder, these are some generalizations. This is not what it's always going to look like, but just some helpful information. So students with an intellectual disability, they may need some extra time to understand more abstract concepts and reminders about social cues. So a tip for that would be to provide visual reminders for how to engage with restorative justice, or using a tool such as a sentence starter to help students get used to participating in activities. Our next one would be autism. Now, we know that students can fall anywhere in a spectrum of autism, but for the most part, that students with autism have some trouble interacting and responding to the world. They do so in a different way, and they may be more sensitive to sounds and changes in routine. So our tip here is to learn the individual qualities of the student and to proactively plan for times when you think something might be upsetting to them. So if you know that a student in your class doesn't react well to loud sounds, knowing that when there are maybe the bell in the classroom, or when you're on Zoom, if there's loud noises at certain points in the day, knowing what to do to mitigate that. Next, we have specific learning disabilities. This covers a whole wide range of different disabilities, but for the most part, students may have trouble with processing, visual, auditory, phonological. And for students with specific learning disabilities, it's especially helpful to present information in multiple modalities. To struggle with emotional regulation and mental health broadly. Tip for this is to approach them with extra patience and really seek to understand their individual escalation cycle. One thing that can be especially important is offering a way out of activities. And this is a good rule of thumb for all of our students, that when you are in an activity that is more emotional, having students know when they can opt out of it, whether that's a routine of getting into a breakout room with a support staff, or letting students know they can go and take a 5-minute break away from the screen, but having that planned in advance so students know that they have a way out of something if they're feeling uncomfortable. And then finally, we have other health impairment, OHI. This used to be used as a catch-all for students that may not have fit another eligibility category. And oftentimes, our students with OHI have ADHD or ADD. A good tip for this is to keep fidget toys around, especially for social emotional activities or circle time, so that they have something to be doing while they're also expected to be sitting still. And then you can also incorporate movement into your restorative justice practices. Thanks, David. Okay, so just to wrap it up with some big picture takeaways. So again, we're trying to encourage everyone to seek to understand your students' individual qualities and needs. So that includes having the whole team reviewing the IEP, but also go beyond what's written on the paper. Really look for figuring out what are their strengths, what are their triggers, and what do their escalation cycles look like. So that, like Sandy showed us on that graphic, when we see a student that's beginning to escalate, what can we do, and how can we use our knowledge of that student to help them get regulated again? And then also just thinking about kind of proactively planning, how will their specific qualities influence how they can participate in restorative justice? Our next point is use art and other modalities or multiple intelligence to give choice of expression. Using these different modalities will touch on students' differing abilities, and it'll also make things more accessible to a wide variety of skill sets. So students will be more likely to participate in something if they feel like what they're being asked to do is something that they're good at. Next is communication between teachers, social workers, and support staff. We know in our mental health classroom there are a lot of adults working together to support our students, so communication is vital. This can start with having regular meetings with all the adults working together, and that will just help to build community among the adults. And then make sure that everyone is on the same page and responding to students in a similar manner. That's also going to help with that predictability and consistency for students. And then, like I mentioned in the last slide, give students a way out. We know that we all have bad days, so do our students. So make sure that there's other ways to participate, and then also an option for what students can do if they don't feel like they are ready to participate in that moment. And then finally, start small. So again, not everybody is going to be open to sharing maybe their social emotional parts of themselves right away. So start with some low stakes activities. So this can look like and it doesn't take too much from them to do it. So starting with these low stakes activities will give everybody a chance to participate, and will also get students more used to this idea of checking in with themselves and sharing it with others. All right. Thank you very much. So given what we've just learned about behavior and trauma, please use the chat box. And we are wondering, what are some things that could be at the root of behavior you are seeing in your classroom?
Remember, harmed people harm people.
And again, just as a teacher in a mental health classroom in the past, I think it's always important when these big behaviors or these upsetting behaviors of our students, sometimes it's easy to forget where they're coming from and to just focus on the behavior. And so I always think it's really important to take that time to step back and think, what is at the root of them? So I'm seeing low self-concept, low self-agency, academic deficits, absolutely. Black Lives Matter, learned hostility, disrupted attachments, poverty, disempowerment, absolutely. Abuse, neglect, haven't been sleeping well. So we know that our students are coming to us with a lot of baggage on them.
Okay, well, we're finishing up with the chat on this and what could be at the root of some of the behavior we're seeing in our classroom. I want to move on to, oh, look at that. There's another question we forgot about. How could current events affect us as learners and teachers? We can put that in the chat box too. So there's a lot going on right now. I'm not going to list it all because it might even, just to hear it could be a trigger, but there's a lot happening right now currently. And how could those current events affect us as learners and teachers? Maybe if you have any thoughts on that, put that in the chat. I'll spend a couple seconds doing that.
And I would really like for you to put those in the chat. If you recall, our Columbia University trauma-informed online during a global health crisis, one of those principles is acknowledging the difficult topics that are going on right now. And, you know, it's an overused word, unprecedented, and yet it is accurate. So what kind of things are affecting us? Compassion fatigue, thank you. Systemic racism.
Yeah. Death and loss, absolutely grieving. Mourning. Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes. Losing Bozeman was really traumatic for many of us.
Mm-hmm. Survival mode.
Oppression.
Isolation too, that's true.
I'm refraining from being ultra political, but the sound of a certain person's voice is a trigger for me.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that goes to the SEL piece of us holding safe spaces and being self-aware really before we work on self-management, because we do have to metabolize an awful lot to be able to be our best selves. So we have a lot of tools and a lot of strengths and a lot of activities, and always feel free to reach out to one another. You're welcome to reach out to myself around our own wellness in this environment and these set of systems, to just metabolize what we're going on so we can be at our best selves well.
Okay, in the time that we have remaining, we want to talk about a little bit about moving Circle online. Circle is, restorative justice is something that is very personal and profoundly relational, and best to do in person, where you can present your whole body and not just from here up. But here we are, we find ourselves in a situation where we are doing a lot of Zoom, and we are doing our best to move the process based in a philosophy that we described earlier online. And so the question is, how do we do that? And the answer is, we're all trying to figure it out as we go. But we have learned some things over the last few months, and I would love to give you some tips on moving your circles from the physical space to the virtual space. And so let me just move that thing. Okay, so when we're in person, we always have these 5 guidelines, and we always invite additional ones from the participants, right? But in the OUSD, we have these 5: respect the talking piece, which means actively listening to the person who has the talking piece; speak and listen with respect; speak and listen from the heart; remain in circle, which is about being present, really. Doesn't mean you can't go to the bathroom or sit down or stand up or anything. And then honor privacy, to know that we are all human beings, that we all need to process and talk, but to do that with the utmost respect, and maintain the privacy of those in the circle. And then, like I said, we always invite additional ones from the people in the circle as well. So those are the ones we do in person. But when we move online, they look a little bit different, right? So respect the space, maybe not the talking piece as much, because we don't actually have a talking piece, a physical object, but we respect the space, the circle space. We ask people to mute their mic. Sometimes in a circle, if it's small, I don't ask people to mute their mic, because it's just nice to get some feedback, from people that, as someone's talking, for someone else to be like, yep, yeah, right, oh yeah, just to get a little bit of background noise, so it doesn't sound like you're talking to into a sound booth, Video on, if possible. It's not always possible. We're never going to push it. All of you have probably seen all kinds of stuff about that coming out lately. But this is a personal thing. It's relational. So it's nice to have our videos on and be able to see and read as much body language as we can. Of course, speak and listen with respect, and speak and listen from the heart. Those remain the same. Remain in the space. Again, being present. And of course, what happens in Zoom is going to stay in Zoom. If something's being recorded, that has to be discussed, beforehand. And again, we're talking about a circle, not a professional development or a professional learning opportunity. And that part down there where it says in the chat box, right, anything else, that's not for you. That is just something, when I have this slide up and I'm doing guidelines for circles, we'll ask people to just add their additional guidelines into the chat box. So that's another way of adding additional guidelines. And then, as I've said before, when I was talking about our philosophical foundational principles, we decide, we vote on these sort of by consensus, right? And so everybody needs to be thumbs up, or at the very, at least I can live with this. If someone is like, no, we need more conversation, then we have more conversation about it. There's probably a really good reason why we need to have more conversation. So that's consensus decision making. Doesn't have to take a long time, as some people think. Doesn't have to be tedious. But if it does require more conversation, it's usually because the conversation needs to be had. Okay, so that's one way that Circle might change from being in person to online, is how the guidelines, or sometimes we even call them courtesies, to move away from rules or norms or guidelines. Just how we want to be courteous with each other. The elements of the circle process are going to be the same in the sense that we always do an opening and we always do a closing to separate the space from the outside, from the rest of the world that we were just in. Creating a circle is about creating an intentional space. And so doing an opening and doing a closing is a way of creating that space and then letting people know we're leaving that space, right? And after an opening, like you might remember an opening we did today was I read a quote and then we did the little mindfulness for a few, breaths. That was an opening. Those are good openings you can use. But we always check in, just a quick check-in. Sometimes a check-in, sometimes the circle is the check-in, right? But sometimes the check-in is just quick, how are you feeling? Or what'd you notice on the way here today? Or, describe your mood by a weather pattern, things like that. I'm sure you could scaffold that question for your students, and all of you probably have multiple times. We want to review our guidelines that I just went over. And then often we play a game. One example of a game is up, down, stop, go, where you kind of stand up in front of the screen and you go like this and everybody goes up. You go like this, everybody goes down. You run in place, you say stop, they stop, go as you run, and then you'll do the opposite. So if I were to go like this, everybody has to go down, right? And so it's just kind of a fun game. The link, when you get this slide presentation, you can click on the thing that says game, perhaps a game, and that'll take you to a list of all kinds of games you can play on Zoom. You can look through them and see which ones are appropriate for your students. There's the home scavenger. Yes, Sandy?
I would like Sam to speak on scaffolding movement and games in our SPED classes a little bit too, just for a second.
Yeah, so I would say that's something that you would want to do on an individual basis, knowing your students. There's going to be some of those games that you look at and you think this is not a good game for these students for whatever reason it might be. And there'll be some games that you feel like you need to create maybe some extra courtesies or guidelines around in order to make that game safe. And so my suggestion would be broadly, just do your best to apply your special education or your clinician lens to these games when you're looking at them, keeping in mind that these are generally created for a neurotypical audience, and think through, I guess, how could this possibly go wrong, and try to think through, what things you can do to help mitigate that would be my suggestion. Thanks, Sandy.
Awesome. Thank you, Sandy and Sam. Love that. You're right. These were developed for a neurotypical audience, and you all are the experts in terms of your students and what you think is appropriate or not. And then we want to talk about our values, and or have a discussion about whatever it is we're going to talk about. And we went over ways to be able to do that. Stephanie talked about that. And then we want to check out, how are you feeling right now? How was the circle for you? Things like that. And then close, right? And so that's basically the elements of a circle. And another way a circle goes is in this way. So one way to look at or think about the flow of a circle is to think about it in the terms of like this, which would be like a medicine wheel, right? So this will help you understand how much of time would be generally dedicated to each part of your circle, right? So if you're looking at this clockwise, and let's just say for the purposes of explaining this, that we're talking about a 1-hour circle, okay? You're gonna spend the first 15 minutes or so, you're gonna do the opening, you're gonna do the check-in, okay? You're gonna maybe do some introductions in the beginning if people don't know each other. If you're doing this with people that are new to each other, you're getting acquainted. Then you're going to spend the next 15 minutes talking about shared values, going over the guidelines or the courtesies, building those relationships, right? Building on the introductions and the getting acquainted. So now you may notice you've just spent half an hour, which is half the time you're together, building the foundation for having the conversation you're about to have. And this is, so some people that aren't used to circle might be like, during that half hour, when are we going to talk about what we came to talk about? Or when are we going to get to the thing that we're going to be doing, the game or the discussion or whatever it is? But when they get there, they usually understand like, oh, we had to get to know each other and build our relationships first, because that creates a springboard for the conversation around addressing the issues or whatever it is you're there to discuss or talk about, right? It might just be creating some shared values as a class, or you know, something simple. But it's really important that you spend a good chunk of time doing that, so that the part around addressing issues, it goes deeper. And then of course you want to get to the next steps, or the taking action, or coming up with a plan, or follow up, or whatever it is you need to do to make sure that you feel like there's some closure, right? And that you'll be doing the checkout and the closing during this time as well, right? So this is all to give you an idea of what the flow of a circle should look like, whether it's in person or online, okay? And it's also why a circle takes time. And that another example of how it is very difficult to fit this paradigm, which remember comes from an Indigenous paradigm, into the dominant paradigm, which schools are all about, right? Public education in America is hard to fit this into. It doesn't mean we give up. It just means we have to be aware that we're trying to fit something, a non-dominant paradigm, into a dominant paradigm, with the hopes of moving that dominant paradigm towards a more restorative worldview, or a more restorative culture and climate in your school, okay? So this is the flow of a circle, important to understand. And this is a tip that when I do circles and I have a small amount of people, this is from an actual circle that we did. I will, and I know who's going to be there, I will create a Google slide that looks something like this. And it has people's names in it, so they know who's before them, they know when they are, they know who's going to go after them, and they know which direction to go. And so this is just one example of what you can do if you're on Zoom, so that people, it alleviates the anxiety of when am I going? Or, you know, because another way to do this would be that the circle keeper picks the people that go based on how the people are on their screen. Another way to do it would be that the person who's going then says, I pass to, you know, Sandy, or I pass to Sam, right? But this way it's very clear that, you know, I'm, you know, going to go before Denise, and I'm going to go after Gil, right? And I know that, and it helps me see my place. And so this is just made during in a Google slide. Let me go back for a second. Another way to do this would be to see the centerpiece there. It's really nice to have a centerpiece, because we always have one in person. But sometimes I'll remove that picture and I'll actually put the question in there, right? So what's your favorite flavor of ice cream, or something, you know, like, or describe how current events have impacted you, or whatever the question is. We put that in there, and so people can have that question and help them think about it, and remind them of what the question is. Because a lot of times in circle, the question needs to be reiterated a number of times, because people are so into listening what people are saying. When it gets to them, they're like, what was the question again, right? And so you can put a picture of a centerpiece or anything else there if you want, but also having the question there. Or for students that maybe that you work with, you can have the sentence starter for the answer in there. I feel blank because blank, or whatever it is, you know, to help them understand how to answer the question, right? If that makes sense. So how does the circle process change? I just explained about the talking piece and how to do that. Sometimes you'll need to do a shorter time frame. A lot of times the time is already set for you, because it's during advisory, or if it's during a class or something like that. But usually Zoom circles tend to be a little bit shorter. There's also all those features like, you know, being able to raise hands and use the chat, and smaller circles and breakout groups, and other things like Jamboard or the Padlet, or different things you can use to punctuate or add to your circle. And just remember that, you know, we are guests in our students' houses, and learning styles can be amplified by Zoom, or other, you know, video platforms, okay? And also, like I said, there's been a lot of talk about equity in remote learning lately. And just important to be aware of our biases and how they play out, having as much empathy as we can for our students, and for ourselves. And when you look at this Google slide presentation, feel free to click on this link here, and it'll take you to an article that we thought was good that a woman wrote on this very subject. Like I said, we ask people to have their videos on if possible, but we're not going to trip if they don't put their videos on, right? It's just the way it is. And we need to be respectful of that and understand that, okay? Let's see. Oh, and so that concludes our webinar for today. Let me stop sharing my, let me go back to us being all together. Look at that. Sandy, Stephanie, Sam, anything y'all want to say before we head out?
Last remarks in the chat. We have all of 8 minutes together. Are there things that you want more information or support around? Feel free to put it in the chat. Feedback, appreciation for one another. This may be, you get to see some colleagues that you love, much like I am seeing my great colleagues. Feel free to chat for a couple of minutes on unmet needs or deeper dives or appreciations.
I want to just say again, I so appreciate you all coming to this professional development. I know that you have so much on your plates right now, and that you do some of the most difficult work. And I just applaud you for showing up every day for your students and being those rocks that are going to help them succeed. So thank you so much.
So as the chat monitor reminds me of hall monitoring in elementary school. Catherine Lewis talks about or asks for circle format. So to do a PD in circle format. We thought we would have many more participants today. I'll talk to my fearsome threesome and see if maybe we can put that together and have a circle with those of you that wish.
Yeah, I want to make sure that you all know that I'm totally open to you reaching out to me, just to have if you want a one-on-one or you want to, you have a question about anything restorative justice related. I know Kate reaches out from time to time, and it's nice to be able to chat with her about her unique experiences. And actually, there's things that you've written in the past that I've been able to use and incorporate into the RJ program. And so it definitely goes both ways. I learn a lot from you all. And so, you know, Sandy just put our emails in the chat there. You know, we're here for you. So you should reach out. And Stephanie, anything you wanted to say? Or Sam?
I'll just say thank you to everyone who, you know, took the time to be here. Not to throw shade at our general education teaching peers, but you know, I really feel like your programs that you work in are programs where you have the unique ability to have a truly immense impact, a positive impact on the children that you're working with. And, you know, by definition, the children that you have in your programs often are our most at-risk youth. And so I think the more that we can work to better our practice, the more that we can do things like incorporating circles and restorative justice into our work, you know, the better outcomes that we'll have for kids. So really appreciate all of you being here. Thank you.
And I feel greedy having maybe the last word, but thank you so much. You're part of my tribe, clinicians. Circle is really a wonderful, wonderful framework for doing group therapies. I love to talk about healing with you all anytime. Text me, and I'll be talking with Sam and Stephanie and David about putting something together where we can have a circle and you can experience circle if you've not. And I just appreciate your time. So valuable.
Stephanie?
Stay in touch.
Stephanie, you good?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that we're hoping to offer this training again in the fall for anybody who missed it, and we would love to also offer the opportunity to actually do a circle with you all. So just thank you so much. This has definitely been the highlight of my week, and I just appreciate all of you.